When I was a couple weeks short of my 70th birthday, I started thinking about my mother's mother, who lived to be 100, and her mother, who lived to be 102, and my father, who lived to be 90, longer than anyone we had ever heard of in his family. I began to think that maybe our generation could be the first to routinely live to be 100. When I talked about this at family dinner one night, my granddaughter, who was 5, said,
"What are you going to do for the next 30 years, Grandpa?"
Hello, I'm Dr. Janet Price.
And I'm Gregg Kaloust. And we are Oldish. And this is our podcast, Oldish.
If you're oldish or know someone who is, please join us every week for conversations amongst ourselves
And our special guests
about what it means to be oldish in the 21st century.
If you ever wonder whether you're getting old, you're oldish. What are you going to do for the next 30 minutes?
Hi, I'm Greg, and I'm oldish.
Hi, I'm Janet, and I'm oldish. Welcome to this episode of our podcast, Oldish, Conversations on Aging in the 21st Century. Hi, Greg.
Hi, Janet. How are you today?
I'm good. It's Halloween today.
Oh, yeah, it's Halloween.
It's like,
yeah.
I think there's ghosts in my room. It seems like a great moment to talk about fearfulness, fearlessness, and how that relates to oldish. I know I've been thinking for a while now about some of the things that I feel fearful about as I'm aging. And I know on our podcast, we talk a lot about what are ways we can truly and completely be in our lives in this moment as we're aging. And that's all exciting. And I still feel fearful at times. And sometimes it's, again, not knowing how others who are oldish manage that. And I think that's part of our goal in our podcast is how do we manage these different aspects of aging that maybe weren't thought about in previous generations, weren't talked about. And especially if people were thinking, well, that's it. I retired, my life is over. Then I don't know if fear came in or kind of a drudging acceptance. So I thought this would be an interesting day to talk about fearfulness and fearlessness. Is that something we strive for? And the role of courage as we're aging.
Yeah, it's a good time to have that conversation. Most of the time when we have a guest, assuming we remember to, which is one of the issues of oldishness, but assuming we remember to, we usually will ask our guests before we sign off on looking at their oldishness, two things. What are they excited about and what are they afraid of as they move into oldishness? So we've learned some things about it. One of the first things that comes to my mind is I think a very high percentage of people have talked about dementia or other kinds of debilitating conditions is what they're afraid of as they get older. At least in the U.S., I'm pretty sure that it's a near universal anxiety for people who are getting older is dementia. I'm sure just about every family in America has been affected by dementia within 2 or 3 degrees of separation. So we all know what it looks like, and I think we're all afraid of it. That's probably one of the things that I'm most afraid of. I'm not terribly afraid of it. There's all kinds of press about what to do to prevent it. And I just kind of do most of those things anyway, because that's what I'm doing. So I'm not terrified of it, but it definitely is there. There was dementia in my family. I know my sister, that's what she was most afraid of was dementia. And that led her to, when she was diagnosed with lung cancer, it led her to not quit smoking because she was more afraid of dementia than she was of lung cancer. So,
Well, I just want to say as an aside that I've had people in my family who've died from lung cancer, and it seems that once, in my small experience, once someone is diagnosed with lung cancer, then they feel like, why stop? And that's a good reason why not to stop, because it's better than dementia, and they can think of other reasons too. But yeah. Well, it's interesting because the emotion of fear is based on the unknown. We're afraid of what we don't know. We don't know. So, and that creates fear. And the fear of expected, but you're not sure of dementia, cancer, different things that could happen. I find that it's scary for me knowing that I'm really, well, I feel like I'm close to the end of my life. I'm certainly closer to the end of my life than I have been before this moment. And feeling my body slowing down, and my brain, I don't feel like I'm on the doorstep of dementia at this moment, but I also notice my brain slowing down and in different ways. So that's what's been one of the things that's been scary for me in my oldishness, is kind of not knowing how to manage it and not knowing how other people manage it, and knowing that no one can tell me exactly my future. No one can say either when I'm going to die, what I'm going to die from, what it's going to look like from this moment until my death. So I really appreciated this article by Andrew Colbreth, who's a philosophy professor. The title of his article was "True Courage Isn't Being Fearless, It's Fearing Well." So he made the noun fear into what is that? Verb, fearing well.
Yeah.
So, one of the quotes from that jumped out to me was, "What makes bravery so admirable is not fearlessness, but rather the brave person's ability to act despite their fears."
Well, that's one of the essentials of courage, I think. The people who are actually not afraid of anything are probably psychopaths. They're, but the people that we consider to be heroic, and I actually think life ain't easy. So I actually think just about everybody is heroic. Everybody that keeps going is heroic. You step into that unknown, despite your fear of it, that takes courage. And that's how you keep going. You just keep going, and you put one foot in front of the other. And that's how people that we typically think of heroes, that's what they do. I've read lots of stories about and interviews with soldiers from a battlefield and so on. And they said, "That was amazing. You weren't afraid to do that." And they said, "I was terrified, but I didn't see any other choice." So you go forward.
I was thinking about the first book that we looked at together in our book club, Remnant Population, and was thinking about how the main character of that book, an aging oldish woman who chose to stay behind on the planet when everyone else was being transported off the planet, certainly took a lot of courage. And then having to figure out how to live on a planet all by herself, grow her own food, all the things that she needed, I think is such a great example of facing whatever is ahead of us, not without fear, but with courage.
Yeah, I think so too. She was a remarkable character. Also, that was colored by the other choices. Her son was upset because she wouldn't go on the ship with him, but everybody knew that at her age, there was no way that she would survive the journey. So, which is scarier? And I think that there are some people who would say, "I'm checking out. I'm done.
Yeah.
I'll get on the ship and I'll die in comfort in the ship."
Mm-hmm.
Or, "I don't like that picture at all, so I'm going to stay here and see what happens otherwise," with no information at all about what could or might happen to her.
Right. And in the spirit of no judgment, either would have been that person's decision, either one. But we got to see this person's, what it was like for her to face her fears and find her courage.
Yeah.
When you were talking about taking each step and not knowing what was going to happen, next, it made me think of babies. And often we can learn so much from how babies, infants, young children respond to their life experiences and their moment-to-moment experiences. And so I thought of a baby learning how to walk and how they prop themselves up, they're balanced by holding onto the furniture, and then they take that step and then they fall. And then they get back up and they try again and they take a few steps. And I think the difference is, of course, that children don't have a sense of future. So it is that moment for them. In that moment, they took a step, they fell down. Now this moment, they feel the urge to stand up and try again. But what's there that we can try to recreate for ourselves is that sense of being in the moment, which I think is such a gift and such a wonderful way to be as we're aging. Is what is it like for me in this moment and to be in this moment?
It reminds me of something from our studies of Buddhism, that the cause of suffering is the desire for things to be other than they are. And since that's not possible, it causes some stresses for sure. But if you can accept, yes, this is where I am. And so going back, for example, to the fears about dementia, and I think everyone who qualifies as oldish has the experience of finding themselves in their kitchen saying, what did I come in here for? Where did I put my car keys? That sort of thing. And that, I know a lot of people who are just get really upset about that because, oh no, this is the first step toward dementia, because is in fact, short-term memory loss is, no, it's natural, but also when it tips past the normalcy or the regular part is when we kind of feel like that's the slippery slope down into dementia. And I know people who just, I'm not going anywhere. I'm afraid that something's going to happen to me. I'm not going anywhere. And other people say, well, I got to go to the store. That's why I came into the kitchen, was to make a shopping list. Oh yeah, that was it.
Exactly.
Yeah, now I got to find my keys. I just had them a minute ago.
Yeah, and what you said about, that it's okay until it starts to go down that slippery slope. And when do we know that it's going down the slippery slope? And all we know is that I didn't used to act like this, and I always did know where my car keys were. And when I came into the kitchen, I knew why I was coming to the kitchen, and I didn't forget when I got to the kitchen why I was in the kitchen. But now I'm doing that. What does that mean?
Yeah.
And we don't know. So just an aside, it is possible in some situations to have a baseline test done on your mental status, your ability, your memory, and all of that, so that as you get older, so you can get some feedback of you're doing fine, and then you've got that baseline for future. But in the big picture, we don't know.
We don't know. And what you said early on is that's where fear comes from, is we don't know. There's fear of the unknown. And there's plenty of unknown to be afraid of, because the reality is we don't actually know anything.
That's right.
We have some agreed upon theories, but we don't actually know anything. And the fact that I did something yesterday and the result was such and such does not mean that if I do the same exact thing, or what appears to be the same exact thing today, it will have the same outcome. But we always think it will.
Something I got out of Buddhist studies and reading was this image of that life is that we're falling, and we're just falling slowly, fast, or whatever it feels like. And when we get to the bottom, we get to the bottom. And there's one part of that image where you're falling, and the idea of being really enlightened or aware and thankful is that as you're falling, you see a branch sticking out of where you're falling, and there's raspberries on it, and you stop to appreciate the beauty of the raspberry. You reach over and pick a raspberry. And so that image of, you could just be focused on, I'm falling and I'm getting closer and this is really scary and now it's over and I'm going to miss all of this and this never happened in my life and how could this be and I'm so angry. Or it could be, oh, I'm falling and look, there's a raspberry. Isn't it beautiful? And knowing that at any moment you're going to hit the bottom and that will be it. But that's not now. That's not in this moment.
That's not now. I had an adventure in managing fear this past week. It was quite complex, and I had a good chance to study it because it was also lengthy. I was taking down an old shed, and the first step of taking down the old shed was to climb up a ladder onto the roof and unscrew the metal roof panels. And before I went to Nepal the first time in 2015, so 10 years ago, I could not have gotten off the ladder onto that roof. I was so afraid of heights that I could not have gotten onto that roof. Couldn't have done it, period. Even forcing myself. But because I had no choice when I was in Nepal, but to, I'm walking up toward Mount Everest, and there's lots of high places along that. But there's a feature of the trek to Mount Everest Base Camp, which is there are a dozen what used to be rope bridges strung across a canyon. And you have to cross them each going up and coming back down again. And they're not rope anymore. They're steel cables, which I suppose is a kind of a rope. They're not open on the sides. They have chain link fence, and it's steel instead of rotten wood on the bottom, like you'd see Indiana Jones running across the rotten wood on the rope bridges. Same general idea, but somewhat sturdier structure. And in Nepal, up above a certain elevation, things are carried around on yaks. So a yak is like a little cow, and things are carried on the back of the yaks. And because yaks are more valuable than people, yaks always have the right-of-way. So you'd start off across a bridge, and I was terrified, and I was holding on for dear life. One of the benefits of being as big as I am is that I could reach the top of the fence on both sides, and I was going across that way. And on one particular occasion, a yak driver started bringing his yaks across going the other way. And because yaks have the right-of-way, I had to lean myself up against one of the fences. And we're several hundred feet above the river, probably 300 or more feet from where I started from or where I'm going to. So I'm halfway across this 600-foot-long thing, 500 feet above the river, and yaks got the right-of-way. I'm mashed up against this chain-link fence, and a yak came by, stopped, and looked at me and gave me a hip check. And I was terrified. I was just, well, what are you going to do? I'm halfway up to Mount Everest. What am I going to do? Just sit there? No, you got to keep going. So I found ways to manage that. I imagined my grandson sitting on the other side saying, come on, Papa, you can do it. And so, I found ways to manage that. But by the time I got back down, I wasn't afraid of heights anymore. And I could go stand on the edge of things and look down and all of that. So I wasn't afraid to climb up the ladder onto this rickety shed. And I wasn't afraid to get off the ladder onto the roof. And I was so happy about that I was too stupid to be afraid of the rickety shed collapsing underneath me. I should have been afraid of that because that's way more likely than I'm going to fall off the ladder. So managing fears by sliding it into another fear, maybe. But all of that is, I kept going because I was motivated. I wanted to do it. And I know that not everybody that's oldish is in a position of climbing up on something. But as a metaphor, I think it was a pretty good one.
Well, it also makes you think of how do we know when something isn't the right thing to do anymore as far as climbing up a ladder in your mid-70s and doing all of that. But that's a topic for another episode. And maybe it goes along with the biggest umbrella theme of oldishness is if we want to try something and it seems to make sense to us. We interviewed that couple who met in their 80s and decided to get married or move in together. I'm sure a lot of people would look at that, including their families, which they wrote about in their book, who were thinking, what are you doing? You're both in your 80s. What is this? But that's what they wanted to do. And that made sense to them. And I think that's awesome. So, yeah. So you faced your fear. And another sidebar of that is if anybody has a fear of heights, go climb to the base at Mount Everest and then you'll be fine.
That's right. Reach out. I'll set you up.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think one of the other things that I'm afraid of, and it's tied into it, is a fear of loss of independence. The question that popped into my head when you were talking about when do you stop is that age-old question about when do you give up the car keys? And when you give up the car keys, it's not just giving up the car keys, it's giving up your independence, your ability to go out and get in the car and go somewhere.
Yes.
And so when does that happen? I think I'm afraid of that loss of independence, and ties into not wanting to be a burden on my kids or anybody else. I am afraid of not being able to take care of myself. And the way that I'm handling that is I'm just doing my best to keep myself in good shape. I'm putting it off. And I know I'm just kicking that can down the road, but it's a good road. It's, yellow brick and all that good stuff. So
I think one of the keys also is being aware that that day is going to come. And so having that's a combination of fear and courage, either reminding ourselves or having the mantra that I will be able to face that when it happens. I will have the courage to hand over my car keys or whatever else. So that makes me think that this fear about aging, which is probably obvious, is about loss, the fear of upcoming losses, while we experience the reality of losses already and what is to come. And once we get there, then it'll be, which could be another episode, is what do we do when we experience that loss and we're faced with the loss, whatever it might be.
I think the way to manage the fear the best is to befriend it and acknowledge it and say, yep, I'm afraid. Come on, fear, let's cross this bridge. You and me will cross this bridge together.
And that makes me think of also community, as we've talked about many times, as far as what the research shows, that as we age, community becomes more and more important. So having a community of others who also feel some of these fears and can encourage each other to be in that place of acceptance, of courage, and walking each other home, as one of the books that we reviewed.
Yeah, walking each other home. Well, I can tell you, as we're kind of coming close to the time frame that we gave ourselves here, I can tell you one thing that I'm not afraid of is us running out of stuff to talk about.
I agree, which is a good thing for us and for our podcast.
Yeah. We'll just keep nattering on.
Yeah. So no fears, listeners. We will keep on going as long as we can.
That's right. We'll keep on going.
Keep on keeping on, and so will we. And happy Halloween. And we'll meet each other soon and for more conversations on aging in the 21st century.
There you go. Happy Halloween and trick or treat.
Happy Halloween.
Bye, Janet.
Bye, Greg.
That's it for now. Thanks for listening. We thought Halloween would be a good time to talk about oldishness and fearfulness. As usual, we found a few treats among the tricks. We stuck this Halloween episode in before the Oldish Book Club episode about the Thursday Murder Club, because we already had our costumes picked out. But tune in next time for Leslie Ross Degnan and the Oldish Crime Team. And don't forget to love everyone. You can leave comments or requests for topics or guests on this or other episodes at www.oldish.me. There's a link there, too, if you've wondered how you can help support our podcast. If you like what you heard today, please tell a friend and rate and review our podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts.